Well, folks, today was day one of the hearings on January 6th, held by nasty Nancy Pelosi's bullshit committee full of MAGA-hating racist leftists and MAGA-hating rhinos. What transpired was a sideshow of fake crying and irrelevance, outright pre-scripted Democrat talking points performed through testimony from Capitol Police officers who offered absolutely nothing of substance in regard to fixing the security issues that plagued the Capitol that day. Now, because we are dealing with an event strictly meant to cause an emotional reaction, not actually accomplishing anything, the lies flowed freely. And to start, Benny Johnson, who himself objected to the Electoral College in 2004, claimed that 7 people lost their lives that day. Jerry Dunleavy tweeted out, "New Capitol Riot Committee Chair Benny Thompson said, quote, 7 people lost their lives. Officer Harry Dunn said, quote, Sicknick died from injuries he sustained in the line of duty. But the medical examiner said Sicknick died of a stroke in a natural manner." Now, certainly don't look for any Republicans to get on national television and publicly scold these lying idiots, and yes, that includes these worthless Capitol Police, these swamp soldiers totally devoted to the party in power, similar to the FBI and so many others. Now, before we get any further into this Nancy Pelosi orchestrated clown show, let's take a quick commercial break to pay some bills. Friends, I'm going to point out the obvious. It seems like big government and big tech are trying to destroy America. Everything they touch turns into a disaster. Pretty soon the whole system will fall apart, and the first thing to fall will be the food supply chain. So, do you have enough emergency food to get through a serious long-term crisis where you can't get food at the grocery store? Most people don't, and they'll panic when the time comes. That is why the smart move now is to get long-term storage emergency food before things go bad. I highly recommend My Patriot Supply. They've served millions of American families and have over 41,000 4-star and 5-star reviews. Their mission is your survival, and right now you can save 25% on a 4-week kit of emergency food that will save the day, probably soon. Order a starter kit for each member of your family and they'll ship everything quickly and discreetly to your door. Go to preparewithresurgence.com so you can claim your 4-week emergency food kit and save 25% in the process. That's preparewithresurgence.com or hit that link in the description box. Okay, so actually, if we are going to use the broad rubric that this moron Thomas is using, this moron of color is using, then thousands of people lost their lives for a variety of different reasons across the country that day. Regardless, only one was a direct result of something done at the Capitol that day. That would be Ashley Babbitt, say her name, who was shot and killed by an unidentified police officer damn near at point blank. But if we're being honest, you see, that's okay in DC because she was a Trump supporter, and that's all that really matters to them. And I'll keep saying it because I guess it just needs to be said. No, Officer Brian Sicknick did not die of injuries he sustained in the line of duty. That's another lie Republicans sit back and let Democrats get away with. He died a day later of a stroke he suffered nearly 12 hours after the events of January 6th. That is not in dispute. You see, any connection to January 6th is purely speculative. And in no other situation do we blame the deaths of officers who die of natural causes on stress endured while on duty. You see, that's a crock of shit, and that's not how any of this works, and Republicans should be screaming that through a megaphone. Thomas is also lumping in 2 officers who later committed suicide despite there being no direct evidence whatsoever that their decisions were based on January 6th. All the other deaths in the 7 mentioned were of natural causes. Then there was the claim that January 6th was the worst attack on the Capitol since 1812. Josie Gestetner tweeted out January 6th was the worst attack on the Capitol since 1812, ? Odd because in 1954, 5 congressmen were wounded on the floor when 4 terrorists opened fire from the visitor area. President Carter later commuted or reduced their sentences. Furthering his point in the tweet, the Capitol building has been bombed numerous times throughout its history, resulting in extensive damage. The idea that the meandering trespassers of January 6th represented a greater threat than literally being shot or blown the hell up does not pass muster. It's that kind of claim a hysteric makes without regards for the facts. Of course, the witnesses also got in on the act. Why not? Get a load of this scripted nonsense. This literally came right out of a DNC commercial.
More and more insurrectionists were pouring into the area by the speaker's lobby near the rotunda, and some wearing MAGA hats and shirts that said Trump 2020. I told them to just leave the Capitol, and in response they yelled, "No, man, this is our house. President Trump invited us here. We're here to stop the steal. Joe Biden is not the president. Nobody voted for Joe Biden." I'm a law enforcement officer, and I do my best to keep politics out of my job. But in this circumstance, I responded, "Well, I voted for Joe Biden. Does my vote not count? Am I nobody?" That prompted a torrent of racial epithets. One woman in a pink MAGA shirt yelled, "You hear that, guys? This nigga voted for Joe Biden." Then the crowd, perhaps around 20 people, joined in screaming, "Boo, fucking nigger." No one had ever called me a nigger while wearing the uniform of a Capitol Police officer. In the days following the attempted insurrection, other black officers shared with me their own stories of racial abuse on January 6th. One officer told me he had never, and in his entire 40 years of life, been called a nigger to his face, and that streak ended on January 6th. Yet another black officer later told me he had been confronted by insurrectionists in the Capitol who told him, "Put your gun down and we'll show you what kind of nigger you really are." I sat down on a bench in the rotunda with a friend of mine who was also a black Capitol Police officer and told him about the racial slurs I endured. I became very emotional and began yelling, "How the blank could something like this happen? Is this America?" I began sobbing. Officers came over to console me.
Folks, have you seen any footage, or more importantly, heard any audio from that day at all backing up these bought and paid for lies? I haven't. To say we are losing our country at this point is an understatement.
Because they told the truth? Why is telling the truth hard? I guess in this America, it is. Us four officers, we would do January 6th all over again. We wouldn't stay home because we knew it was going to happen. We would show up. That's courageous. That's heroic. So what I ask from you all is to get to the bottom of what happened. And that includes, like, I echo the sentiments of all of the other officers sitting here. I use an analogy to describe what I want as a hitman. If a hitman is hired and he kills somebody, the hitman goes to jail. But not only does the hitman go to jail, but the person who hired them does. There was an attack carried out on January 6th, and a hitman sent them. I want you to get to the bottom of that. So, thank you.
Well,
Is it me, or does it sound like they just typed this up last night and gave it to him with a wad of cash? Anyways, a lot of things happened on January 6th. What did not happen is a hitman directly ordering people to attack the Capitol, in this case, Donald Trump. During the speech, Trump specifically asked people to peacefully protest. How do I know? I was there, and I heard it with my own two damned ears. Now, what the FBI was doing in other parts of the crowd to rile people up, I have no idea. But honestly, that some of these protesters or their actual rally goers didn't ultimately listen to what Trump said is on them. We still have agency in this country, and people are responsible for their own actions. Well, unless you're a Democrat of color or a member of Antifa, I guess. Besides, there's no real evidence that there was any intent to carry out a real hit that day. Those that entered the Capitol had plenty of opportunity to cause bodily harm to people inside instead of taking selfies with grandma. That includes police officers who stood in the hallways telling crowds to stay back. If those officers did that, I guess is commendable. I guess. But the reality is that they could have been overran easily. That they weren't is evidence that the crowds were there merely looking to cause a scene. That's exactly what happened. Now, nothing worthwhile is going to come from this bullshit stunt. Pelosi is not going to allow a real investigation into the security lapses because they were her lapses. They were on purpose, and finding that out would be the only practical thing to do at this point. Instead, she's going to trot out people to tell their sob stories, ignoring that just because something is bad, it doesn't make it worthy of this kind of reaction. If Democrats and Pelosi's Republicans actually cared about what happened on January 6th, they wouldn't be lining up officers to give their opinions. Instead, they'd be focused on whatever systemic failures occurred that need to be corrected. That is ostensibly the point of committees like this, right? But we all know that's not the real point. Rather, the point is to cut commercials for 2020 and raise tons of money. I've got a feeling this will backfire, though. But hey, what the hell do I know? I never thought they could get away with stealing an election. Or implement pandemic lockdowns. It's amazing what this country will put up with. Most of this came by way of redstate.com. If you liked it, hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't. Leave a comment down below. There's a PayPal link in the description box, so please put $1 in the bucket on the way out the door. I'd like to thank everyone for all your donations. They're much needed and much appreciated. Now, with all that being said, we'll see you next time.
Come on, move. Move. Easy, easy.